Why, hello. So I've been promising you guys all year that I would do a video to instruct you if I had to be gone for the day. And yesterday you guys kind of mocked me. You made fun of me. You said, there's no way Mr. Southwick is going to do that. Well, I'm here to prove you wrong. Now granted, this isn't the type of video that I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be loud and explosive and have special effects and all that kind of stuff. And I wasn't really able to pull that off. In fact, as you can tell from my outfit, it's still the same day that I saw you guys earlier. It's getting close to 9:30 and I'm still here at the freaking school putting this stuff together. So it's not as great as I was hoping, but I did want to leave you with a little something for the weekend. Hopefully the quiz went well for you. And what I want you to be able to do is I wanted to go through the rest of that packet, at least the questions that I thought were relevant, to make sure you understand the process of how the Fed creates money by injecting money into the banks by buying those treasury bonds. We didn't get to those problems when we were together today, so I wanted to make sure that you knew how to do those, because that is how you would be able to complete Morton 38. So this isn't much. It's, again, not special effects. There's no yellow roses with red tips, me wooing the ladies around town, all that kind of stuff. And I'm sorry for that. I know you expect a lot more from me. But this should at least get you through that packet. And once the packet is through, I feel confident that Morton 38 will be a lot easier. Some of you might have already tackled it again and done fine. If you didn't, I think that especially numbers 11 and 12 in the packet will help you to see just how to do that. With that, I hope that this is helpful, and I hope that you guys have a great weekend, and I will see you guys on Monday. Okay, so first, let's take a look at something that everyone seemed to be struggling a little bit with yesterday, and that is the concept of the increase of the money supply versus the total money supply. Your different questions in the packet that we went over looks at it in different ways. For example, number 5 in the packet was asking about what is the nation's total money supply, whereas, let's see here, number 7, 6 and 7 are asking for the increase in the nation's money supply. So the way that this works is, let's assume for a second that you are going to make a $100 deposit in the bank, and the bank itself has a 20% reserve ratio. So if you want to make a T-chart for that, the first step you would do is on the left there we have the assets and the liabilities. We know that the demand deposit of $100 is going to go under the bank's liabilities. All right, that means the asset side is going to have to match that. And so on the left, we would add $20 in required reserves because we have a 20% reserve ratio. That means that initially there will be $80 in excess reserves that the bank can then decide to use, can decide whether or not they are going to loan out. Based on this problem, we are going to loan it all out because the bank is going to try to maximize its profitability. Therefore, if we're going to look at the increase in the money supply, the increase in the money supply is whatever money the bank can actually create. All right, the bank can't create money with its required reserve. That's money that the bank has to hold on to. All right, but it can create money with the excess reserves, the $80 that are left. So the increase in the money supply is equal to the excess reserve times the money multiplier. So our excess reserves are $80 and our money multiplier would be 5 because it's 1 over the reserve ratio, or 1 over 0.2, which gives us a multiplier of 5. 80 times 5 gives us $400. And what those required, or what that increase in the money supply represents is money that will now be deposited at other banks. This bank has loaned out $80, people borrowed it, deposited at their bank, go out and buy stuff from someone else, they get the new money, they deposit it at their bank, etc., etc. That's how it's multiplied through the marketplace. So the total effect would be that $400 in demand deposits would appear at other banks. Now, in terms of the total money supply, all right, if the question asks you what is going to be the money supply in the country when it's over, remember that the money supply is made up of cash and all demand deposits or checking deposits in the economy. So our total money supply is going to be equal to all demand deposits, both the ones that were just deposited to this bank and all the new ones that are created. So in this case, that would be $100 that were deposited to this account and all the increase in the money supply, which was $400, which brings us to a total money supply of $500. You could also just do it simply and say demand deposits that were just added to this bank, $100, times the money multiplier of 5, instantly gives us that $500 money supply. Kind of skips the step of having to calculate what the increase in the money supply is. So it's all a matter of what the question is asking for. Is it an increase? If it's an increase, you can only increase the money supply with excess reserves. So that would be excess reserves times money market. Or is it asking for the total money supply? And that is the original deposit plus any new deposits created, or the original deposit times the money multiplier. Either way will give you the correct answer. Hopefully that helps to clear it up a little bit. Okay, so let's look at number 8 on your packet. So this one, you should have done the reading for activity 2 that talks about the Federal Reserve injecting money into the system. So this is where we're starting, and this is the other day, and this is where we talk about monetary policy. This is the Fed actually creating money in our banking system. All right, and remember, we talked about the way they do this is they either go to banks or they go to individuals and they purchase treasury securities. In this case, it refers to it as a treasury bond, which is a 30-year loan that our government puts out. So the Fed will pay cash for a bond, and then whoever they pay now has extra cash. So example number 8, the Fed is actually going to a bank and they're paying cash to buy bonds from the bank. So if you look at the T-chart on your problem, number 8, it shows liabilities of $100 in demand deposits. And then on the asset side, we have $20 in required reserves, and we have $80 in bonds. And the question says that the Fed buys the bond from the bank. So remember, on a T-chart, both sides have to always equal each other. There's no change to the liabilities. The still $100 in demand deposits at the bank. The required reserves therefore remain the same. They have to keep $20 in required reserves for that $100 deposit. But the bond has been purchased, so that means that the bond goes negative 80, and we plus 80 in $80 of cash, which becomes excess reserves. So your box on your worksheet there does not show minus 80 bond plus 80 excess reserves, but if we were actually doing it from an accounting perspective, that's how that would look. So we still have $100 on that side. It's just now it's a bond, it's excess reserves instead of a bond. The next step is it asks us how much money is this going to allow the banking system to create. From our earlier discussion, create and increase is the same. All right, the banking system can create a certain amount of money or increase the money supply by that amount of money. So when we see create, you can use it interchangeably with increase. So the 3 steps to figure that out. Once we have figured out that we have $80 in excess reserves, is that we now will take the required reserve ratio, which is 20%. We know that because they have $20 for required reserves and they have $100 in deposits, 20%. And we calculate the money multiplier, which is 1 over 0.2, or 1 over required reserve, and that equals 5. So now our multiplier is 5. And to figure out how much the increase is, then all we have to do is take excess reserves multiplied by the money multiplier, and we get the increase, or how much money is created. And so in this case, we have excess reserves of 80 times the multiplier of 5. That means that we end up with a $400 increase in the money. The banking system creates $400 worth of money in the banking, within the banking system. I'm tripping over it. It sounds ridiculous. I don't have time to re-tape this, so you're just going to have to deal with the fact that I fumbled all over the end of that and looked like a complete idiot. Okay, bye-bye. Okay, and here we go on number 11. 11 is the same thing as the last problem we looked at, number 8, except it just has some bigger numbers. So the question here asks, so the bank has a T-chart that has liabilities of $1,000 in demand deposits. The bank also is holding $200 in required reserves, and initially $300 in loans and $500 in a treasury bond. Again, both sides of the T-chart equal out to 1,000. So the first question, letter A, is what is the reserve requirement ratio? All right, and the reserve ratio is, of course, $200 required reserves over $1,000 in deposits, which is 20%. Easy math. You guys can even do that without a calculator. The next question asks us, if the Fed, as part of its open market operations, buys this bond from the bank, how much do its required and excess reserves change? Now remember, required reserves are only a measure of your demand deposits. If the Fed comes in and buys the bond from the bank, it hasn't deposited any money. So your required reserve in this scenario is not going to change at all. All right, the $200 remains $200, the deposit of 1,000 remains 1,000. No change there. But if the Fed buys the bond from the bank, on the T-chart, we're going to take out the bond, so it'd be negative $500 the bond, but they're receiving the cash for it, so now they have $500 in excess reserves. So when the Fed buys a bond from a bank, it gives them cash, which they now have as excess reserves. When a bank has excess reserves, they can then turn around and loan them out, and that money is multiplied in the economy. The next thing we need to figure out before we can figure out letter C is what the money multiplier is. That is 1 over 0.2, which is the reserve ratio, so our money multiplier is 5. So the change in money supply is going to be excess reserves times the money multiplier, which is $500, which was the excess reserves, again, a direct cash injection into the bank because the Fed bought the bond the bank was holding. 500 times 5 gives us a change in the money supply of $2,500. Okay, and now we're on to number 12. This is probably the trickiest problem on here. I believe this is what Morton 38 looks like because it asks about the general public and if the Fed needs to buy its bonds from the public instead of the banks, which occasionally does happen. The Fed can buy it from the banks or from the public. It just buys bonds in order to increase the money supply. All right, so in this scenario, it asks first for you to fill in John Q. Public's balance sheet. And what it says is the Fed makes John an offer he can't refuse. And so he sells the Fed a $500 bond. That means that John suddenly has money where he didn't have money before. All right, so that is a $500 increase to the money supply. All right, he no longer holds a bond, he now holds cash. So he is going to immediately deposit that cash to the bank. All right, so we see that in the form of a $500 demand deposit on the liability side of the T-chart. Then the bank has to put some of that into required reserves. In this case, the problem tells us it's 20%. So 20% of 500 is $100, and that is the top entry on the asset side. After that, everything that's left over is an excess reserve. this is something that can be loaned out. So this bank has the ability to now loan out $400. So excess reserve, which is question, let's see here, B, is $400. The next question asks, how much can the banking system create in loans? Well, you can take the $400 in loans, multiply it by the money multiplier, which is 1 over 0.2, 1 over required reserve, which gives us 5. So 400 times 5 is a $2,000 in additional loans that a bank can make, or a $2,000 increase to the money supply. Now question D asks what the change in the total money supply is, and this is where this problem is a little trickier than some of the others. The reason this is tricky is because the $500 deposit that John made first is part of the new money supply. That was not money in the supply before. It was money that was tied up in a treasury bond. The Fed gave John cash, so $500 was added initially, and then that $500 helped to generate $2,000 in new loans. So the total money supply after all of this is said and done has increased $2,500. So this is how the Fed pumps money into the economy. The Fed will buy treasuries from either the bank or in this case from the public. That money goes into the banking system, generates a whole bunch of new loans, and now there's extra money in the system. That money has been used to increase GDP and make our economy stronger. So that is really how the Fed increases the money supply.